You're loud. You're loud, Vic. I respect the way you project your voice back there. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming out. Obviously a big week for the Denver Nuggets last week and some of the decisions that were made. I think I want to start off by initially just saying thank you to both Calvin and Coach Malone. It was an incredibly tough decision for us for a lot of levels, but I think at the very end of the day it was a very tough decision because of the amount of respect that I personally have and that we as an organization have for both of what those gentlemen did for us while they were here. Brought us our first championship, helped establish a new culture, new standards that will continue to move on into the future. And, you know, to be frank, neither of them deserved it. And so for that, I apologize. From my position, you know, as a leader of the organization, I needed to be better at different points in time. I could see certain trends behind the scenes with the group, and those were worrisome. But when you have an incredibly talented roster that we have, an incredibly solid group across the board of people, you're able to play through some of that. And so ultimately, you know, I made the decision that I did last week with the hope of kind of rejuvenating the energy of the group and reestablishing some positive thoughts before the playoffs and some belief. And I think that we did that over the last 3 games. Hopefully you can see still a long way to go. But, you know, I think that the initial message that I want to make sure that people understand is that, you know, we give a lot of thanks for what they did. We're pushing forward into the future, and this season is not over yet. So that being said, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. You know, I think that any question like that is going to be answered probably in a very generic way. To simply say that my thoughts aren't there because this season's not over. We just finished the season like a freight train, from what I could tell. I think last Wednesday, you know, was a big step in just shifting the energy and getting past that first game without Coach Malone at the helm. And I thought our group did that brilliantly. Then you came back here Friday night to play a playoff team right next to each other in the standings. And it was one of those nights that, you know, in the NBA season you have to grind through. And so, you know, that first half was a little bit of a slog. I thought our energy was great. We played through it, came through out in the third quarter, started to get back to certain brands of basketball, and then all of a sudden you saw, you know, as Coach Adelman said, you saw the bread and butter start to take over at the end of the game, which was the Jamal and Jokic 2-man game. And then fast forward to yesterday, and, you know, I didn't think that anybody in the group really knew what to expect because, you know, Houston's clinched their spot. They're in a different position than us, not playing for their playoff life. And, you know, were they going to play their players? And so, you know, I was actually pleased to find out that they were going to play their players because I think our guys were ready for a chance to go against a very good team above them in the standings. And I think we came out with the right mindset in the first half that showed a group that still has a lot of resolve and a lot of belief of where they're headed this year.
Josh, back here, at what point did you feel the Malone-Booth dynamic was unsustainable or just their performances individually? And was there an exact moment where you looked at it and thought, okay, this is going one direction?
You know, there wasn't an exact moment. You know, I've seen some of the reports that are out there. Some are true. Some are completely false. You know, one of the reasons that I'm here to talk to you guys is to make sure that there's not any false narratives out there. When there's an information void around a decision like that, sometimes certain stories or perspectives will try to get filled. And so I'm here to answer anything like that. Was there a specific moment? Obviously, there was a specific moment last week. But over the course of this season, you know, to be completely transparent with the group, there were 2 moments in time that I identified where I hesitated. And it was either out of personal feelings or belief for the group. One was last fall. You know, I couldn't tell you an exact date. It was around Thanksgiving at some point when I was really feeling like things were not headed in a direction or up to my standards as an organization. And I saw it was reported that I would sit in with meetings with Calvin and Coach at times, which I did. And we had great conversation in those meetings. But I need more when I'm not around. My role is not to necessarily be there on a daily basis. I need people that are policing the culture and pushing it forward for me on a daily basis. And then, you know, I think that we went on a little run before the All-Star break. That's been reported. I saw out there that I was contemplating something around then. That is true. But, when you have a roster like we do, you have the best player on the planet, it can mask a lot of things. And so, what would be crazier, me doing what I did last week or doing it on an 8-game win streak? And so, there's no real right answer to questions that I have to ask at times. But my feeling and my belief was there was more in that locker room, and that's what I acted on.
Here, from the outside, it seems to me that Tim Conley and Calvin Booth are very different in personality, temperament, strengths, and weaknesses. Is there anything you've learned from going from one to the other that kind of gives you a new perspective of what's important in a front office?
I'd say from my personal perspective, that in any period of transition, I need to be really hands-on. Because, a long time ago, and I told the players, I think it's important for us all as people to understand our individual journeys, of how we all wound up in the same room together. I mean, the different journeys that those people have been on as players alone, to get to that point in that locker room is very impressive, and a wide array. But for me, it really was, coming out of the summer of 2013, we made a lot of organizational changes, and we helped to reestablish a culture underneath Coach Malone that I'm very proud of, and one that resulted in a championship grown organically over time. And to be frank, I'm very protective of that culture at this point. And that's why I say that I failed both Cal and Mo as a leader, because I let certain things slip to a place that they never should have been. And to be honest, we wound up making a decision last week that, like I said, I hesitated on twice, and I needed to be better for the group. Checking some personal feelings, my respect for both of them, to be a better person for the overall group. And that's why I say what I said earlier. Apologize to both Calvin and Coach. But, when I sat down with them both face-to-face and had very tough conversations, it came from a place of respect, which I think they both understood. And, I think it is important to make sure everybody understands that I had as positive of a bad conversation as I could have with each of them. Coach Malone was wonderful. Calvin was wonderful. I'm sure they had a wide range of emotions afterwards, but in the room with them at the moment, I think they both handled the conversation about as well as you possibly can.
Josh, you said that there are things that you observed that made you make this decision. Were any players or team personnel also coming up to you and complaining or asking for a change, or further informing what you were seeing?
No. I think that my job and my role as, the relative leader of this organization is to have a read on that and understand, through a feeling. I'm not going to sit down and talk directly with some of our players. My job is to understand the feeling of the group over a period of time, and that's why I landed on the decision that I was in last week. I saw Yoke kind of was quoted somewhere, but, I did tell him just very briefly beforehand, told him a decision had been made, and wanted to know if he wanted to discuss it. I think, probably the local people here understand his personality as well as anybody. And so, he just kind of nodded, he understood, and onward we were. I know the players in the locker room have an incredible amount of respect for both Coach Malone and Calvin, and especially our tenured guys that won championship with him. So it was very difficult for everybody, but, they're mature. The locker room and some of our core players, they're not in their early 20s anymore. These are grown men with families now. And so they were ready for a challenge that I dropped on them, and I think they've responded in an amazing way.
Josh, how often did you meet with the two of them? And then you mentioned kind of needing for that to kind of be sustained when you're not there. Mm-hmm. What was kind of the process of understanding that it was not a tenable situation when you were not in the room to kind of intermediate?
I think that's a great question. That plays out over a period of time. Unfortunately, when I'm not there, that's exactly what I am, is I'm not there. I have a wide array of responsibilities across our businesses at this point. Just like I talked to the team, last Tuesday was the craziest Tuesday that I could have ever imagined. I had the worst morning that I've had in over 10 years with the Nuggets, followed by the most amazing afternoon I could have ever asked for with Arsenal Football Club. We beat Real Madrid 3-0 in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and we're going into Spain this week, with a chance to advance. They need to stay focused. They got a lot of things that they're dealing with too, but on a human level, that was a rough Tuesday for me. It was all over the place. But I think that, like I just keep saying, as a group, I think that, they understood and the energy was very flat. Maybe one specific that I didn't quite answer earlier was coming into the locker room after our Sunday night loss versus Indiana. I could feel how flat the room was. And, on a 4-game losing streak heading into the playoffs with a flat locker room, that was when I understood and I internalized how much I had let this room slip and that it was not up to the standards of what Denver Nuggets basketball really is.
Josh, on your left, before I ask my question, can you clarify, you said you hesitated twice. Was it a hesitation to make the move on both Michael and Calvin at either time?
Yeah. I think that they're both really good people, and that as an organization, we start with good people who work hard. And so I had good enough relationships with them. I mean, Calvin was an assistant GM here for a number of years before he elevated into his role. Coach, helped establish the foundation of who we are to this day. So my respect for them as people probably led a little bit into that hesitation, but there's also a lot of other factors that it's my job to understand. And so, some of those factors coming into the season are, I think, very well-known certain narratives. I think, one, you're trying to integrate, several new players into the rotation, whether that's young players or established veterans. Establishing a new rotation after the departure of, KCP last summer was going to take a little bit of time. I also thought that we had a few players that were playing their way into shape. To be frank, it was a very, very funny summer from a lot of ways, but from my perspective, I have to understand that, what's the human side of what a player went through last summer. A few of ours went, heartbreaking loss in Game 7, probably needed a few weeks off, had to get themselves in shape for the Olympics, and then what's your natural human reaction after the Olympics? You need some time off to recover. And so those guys are always going to come into shape, are always going to come into camp maybe a little bit behind shape of where the others might be, and that's understandable. And so that all factors into my thinking of maybe an early season decision like I mentioned. Then you fast forward to the All-Star break and you're on an 8-game winning streak, and was it against teams that are playoff caliber? I'd have to go back and look, but I think that those 8 games masked a trend that was going on behind closed doors that ultimately started to really affect the end of our season, and that's why I jumped the way I did.
You had 3 straight first-time GMs, so how much of a factor will it be or consideration to hire a GM that's had that job before?
We're gonna go through a search for sure at the end of the year. I think I need to be as open-minded as possible. We've worked really hard to put ourselves in this position, a position that we've never been in before. I talked about, some of the changes in 2013, but some of the toughest moments that I ever had in my position with the Nuggets would be going through some of those early transitional phases and coming out to talk to our fans and our supporters, and they would be like, Josh, we just want a good team, and we just want to be able to compete. And I just would look at them and I would say, I'm sorry, I believe there's more. And eventually we got there to where everyone believes there's more. And now we're operating at a standard of it that's a championship level. So I need to be aware of what's out there, how to make this team better in all facets. And so, back to my main message, season's not over yet, but once the season is over, I think we're going to be as open-minded as we've ever been about everything. But I think it's important to note that right now, not part of the announcements last week or along the lines of Coach Adelman, but I have named Ben Tenzer interim GM for the time being. And that's just simply done because Ben has been, he started here as an intern way back 2007, 8, 9 maybe. And I know in the moment that Ben knows what I want and we need. And so Ben's going to be at the helm for the playoffs. And I have full confidence in his ability right now. But once the season's over, I'm going to sit down, take a few days break to really think about everything, and then we're going to go attack it like we always do.
Josh, in the middle, this is one of the latest times that a playoff team has ever fired their head coach heading into the playoffs.
I think it's the latest.
The latest. So
Trust me, I went through all that. I'm like, am I crazy? So, I fully understand what you guys are probably thinking in the moment.
So just given that, just how much pressure is there now applied to the rest of the coaching staff, given the change in roles, and how much pressure do the players now feel in the situation, given the later window?
I think that from a pressure standpoint, my whole goal was to rip the Band-Aid off and take away all the pressure for everybody. I think, that my main comments to the group was around belief. So to kind of answer your question, was simply, I don't do what I did last week without having complete faith in several areas. One is our assistant coaches and our whole coaching staff. Those guys have been here for a number of years. We've had a lot of continuity in that area. They've been with this group of players for quite some time. And I think they know what they need to do in a moment like this, when the going gets tough. And then 1B, and it's really just 1A or 1B, doesn't really even matter, is my complete belief in the players. It's a veteran group. Several of them have won championships. They know what the standards are. They know what they're about to head into. And so, I think that with those two areas as kind of your pillars of trust and belief, you can make a decision like you did last week. And while you don't feel good about it, you might feel a little more comfortable knowing that those are your two pillars that you're going to turn and face to. And so I think that, from a pressure standpoint, there is no pressure. We talked about being vulnerable as people, and I think that the decisions that got made last week thought that, maybe that made this group more vulnerable. But, I think Yoke's quote was pretty much spot on.
Josh, are you going to be more hands-on in your role with the organization moving forward?
I don't know if I'll be any more or less. I think that, from my perspective, I've always been pretty hands-on in a way, maybe more so than some people realize. What does that mean? I'm not 100% sure, but, I think with my background, it's natural for me to kind of think about it some. I live and breathe this stuff. This is what I do. This is what I've done for the last 15 years. And so, if anybody has a good read on the group, hopefully it's relatively me at my level. But, I'm never going to be somebody that's saying what player to pick or anything like that. I've moved way past that in my career and my roles and my responsibilities. That doesn't mean my basketball instincts won't kick in. There's a good example, like when Calvin is wanting to trade up in the draft to take a guy like Peyton Watson, and we're going to use a future asset. In that moment, you better believe my basketball instincts kick in, and I know all of the data around one-year former McDonald's All-Americans and their success level in the NBA. And so in that moment, our minds will come together in a way that hopefully help us make a sound decision for the organization when you're using some of the assets and you're in the position that we're in. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Josh, this is three parts to the same question, but there are a lot of different types of coaches, developmental strategists, leaders. Same with front office, people that are good at finding value, good at making trades. Do you have a sense of which of those is most important to you in this moment that'll inform who you hire? And then, to what extent do you think Nikola should be involved in any conversations about who's brought in?
I think what I would say, Adam, in what you've described your question is finding value where others may not. And that's going to be a big area of what we need to be going forward. We have the best player in the world. I think that we've got a great roster, and there's some really good players in there that know how to win, and they seek the moment at the highest level, which, I saw some stuff out there. Well, Nikola Jokic has never had, an all-star, teammate. I was like, he's got some teammates that are ready for that big moment, and they're not afraid of it. And there's a lot of all-stars out there that can't say that. And so, back to Jokic, and I saw DA's quote about him. If he doesn't win MVP, it's hands down the best season ever not to win an MVP. And I know that I'm saying that in biased lenses about our guy in there, because I've watched him grow from, an 18-year-old rookie up there working with his two brothers into a three-time MVP, a finals MVP, and hands down the best player in the world. But I understand there's a lot of different things that go into that vote. And, if he doesn't win it, I'm sure there's going to be a player, that is very, very deserving. Because, you get into those discussions about MVPs, and it's almost like you can't have an argument for one without trying to tear down the other. And I think we've watched some of the highest level basketball be played across the board this year, all over the place. There's so much skill in the league these days, and to see what Jokic is doing is just amazing. But back to your question about finding value, I think we have to be open-minded towards everything, whether that's player trades, seeing value in the draft where others might not, or perhaps, finding a skill set that fits with our roster in a way that other people might not see. And so we got to be open-minded on all fronts.
Josh, speaking of open-mindedness, one of the narratives that went into the vacuum, and you know how the game goes with that, was someone in the organization may have wanted to move Michael Porter Jr. The Kroenkes didn't want to move him. You know, it's not a Mizzou Mafia question. It's sort of a, is there any truth to that first off, and what do you see Michael's role with this organization going forward?
You know, I did see that somewhere, and, you know, if it wasn't such a serious accusation, I would probably laugh a little harder. But, you know, first of all, I'll say I'm incredibly proud of Michael. Let's talk about him on a human level and what he's been through. I mean, several back surgeries, being told that he was never going to play again, you know, slipping in the NBA draft to a place where we were privileged enough to take a player that talented, then working through the setbacks that he's had, not only on the court, not only on the court with his back, but, you know, off the court in his personal life as well. But I think that any kind of report saying that we're not open to trading everybody, you know, possible to improve the team is a complete false. And the other thing that I'll say is, you know, I don't know where that person got their sources from, but I'm surely not going to be greenlighting any trades around here when I don't see complete organizational cohesion and we're not maximizing the group we got.
Hey, Josh, I know you've mentioned a few times, I think, that you have the best player on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, what does capitalizing on Joker's prime years, how much did that drive your decision of last week, and how much will it drive the decisions you will make in the offseason as far as a new GM, a new coach, contract extension, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you have a responsibility when you have a player like that, especially obviously in his prime. But you have, I feel, an even greater responsibility to the person. I've watched Nikola ascend to the player that he is today. But I think the coolest part about him, and I think that for a lot of people in this room, as you've watched him grow, he's the exact same person that he was, you know, 10 years ago. And just honestly, maybe even a better version, because he understands the impact that he can have on people's lives now through the platform of basketball. I always think it's funny when people say that they think that he doesn't care about the game, or he gives off the impression that he doesn't care about the game. I mean, his nickname's the Joker for a reason. And it's not just because it rhymes with his last name. That's his personality. But it's hard to get a read on who he is, and he's very private. I forget how DA worded it the other day, but you know, as impressive as he is from a skill standpoint and what he does physically in the game, but the way he thinks it is, man, it's incredible. And the perseverance and the stoicism that he shows as a player and as a person is the exact same thing on the court as you get off the court. And so I'd be the dumbest guy in basketball if I wasn't asking him for his opinion on certain things, but it's my responsibility to make those decisions for the best of the organization. And I think Yoke, he understands that, respects that very much.
Josh, some of the reporting out there has indicated that, you know, maybe Russell Westbrook had become a problem in the locker room. Do you get the sense that, or do you get any indication that that was true at all?
I mean, I can't say enough good things about my experience with Russ. I can't speak for anywhere where he's been elsewhere, but, you know, when it first became a possibility to have that guy on our team and he and I started talking, I was just like, I just am happy to have you in the locker room, because now you just know you won't be breaking our back anymore. Some of the plays that he's made over the years. But to actually answer your question, like, no, I mean, Russ has been nothing but a positive for this group. You know, if anything, the way that I would describe Russ is, you know, every year we have, you know, a different, I forget how you want to class it, different, you know, bowl of food, bowl of soup, whatever. Russ was a very spicy ingredient for us to add, and we needed it. We needed it. I thought we needed some spice this year. He's one of the most competitive people and players out there. And I think as long as we're channeling that in the right direction, Russ's heart is 100% always in the right place. Because, you know, a lot of guys in our locker room, we do have some young players in there. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm sure they grew up looking at Russell Westbrook as one of their idols in a lot of way. And so I think Russ, the cool thing about Russ is that, one, that competitive fire gets him going. But at this stage, who he is as a person, I think he understands the impact that he can have across the board. And it's just making sure that we're harnessing that and pointing in the right direction. And he's an unbelievable teammate, unbelievable person, and we're lucky to have him.
Josh, what was, excuse me, what was your conversation like with David when you told him he was going to be the interim head coach? How did you decide on him being the interim, and how much of an audition is this playoff run going to be for him?
DA's been with the group for a number of years. I don't have the exact stats, but he's been our lead assistant for quite a while. He grew up around the NBA, just like Coach Malone did, in a way. But you can tell DA, I think, from the few times that he's had a chance to interact with, for lack of better expression, the media, or the public through the media, I think you get a real sense of who he is as a person and his ability to communicate. It might be different if we were trying to throw somebody in from the outside on the fly right now. But DA knows that group. He knows the type of communication I think that they need, especially right now. And while he hasn't been in that chair, head coaching chair before, he's more than ready for it. I think Patrick Waugh had a great quote one time. He's like, I read this funny stat sometime that, first-year head coaches always have to have game one somewhere, or something like that. And DA had to have game one somewhere at some point, and last week it just happened to be for him in Sacramento. But I think that the group has full faith in him leading us going forward. But as they know in that locker room, it's going to take everybody, and especially from this point forward. We worked our butts off over the last week, got progressively better, put ourselves in a position where we can now have a few days off before the playoffs. But I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't at least acknowledge what's coming into this building, and that I think is probably the NBA team playing the best of anybody right now. I don't know what the Clippers stats are over the last 15, 20 games or so, but they've been playing unbelievable basketball, and this group is going to be challenged to the utmost, because I know the amount of respect that we have for them, the players they have, the coaching staff they have, and we better be ready because they are playing the best basketball of anybody in the league, and the West is an absolute bloodbath. But we got some pretty good players too. We got some great coaches, and we'll be ready.